How was Mr. Gacy's attitude at the house? Talkative, outgoing, cooperative, friendly? Initially, yes, I would say so. As a matter of fact, he even admitted to you that he was, in fact, in the pharmacy sometime around 8:45, 9 o'clock on December 11th, didn't he? Yes, he did. The same man who had given long narrative answers for Sullivan was now giving very short answers for Amirani. Then Amirani started asking questions about information that hadn't come out in the direct questioning. Did you learn that, actually, about 3 o'clock in the morning, John Gacy appeared in the Des Plaines police station? I later learned that a person who identified himself as John Gacy came into the station. You learned the person who appeared at the Des Plaines station at 3 o'clock on that morning was covered with mud too, wasn't he? Again, hearsay. I learned that he did have mud on his clothing. Isn't it a fact during your investigation you interviewed 3 children named Stevenson who told you they saw a man fitting Mr. Gacy's description and a boy fitting Robert Peast's description standing next to a black Oldsmobile in front of the store? No, I don't believe so. Didn't they say they saw the boy get in one side of the black Oldsmobile and the man get in the other side? They did see a man and a boy enter a vehicle? Yes, I believe it was on each side, and they drove off towards the gas station. And they didn't see this man dragging the boy or hitting him or anything? They did not say that the boy was dragged in the car. Amirani dropped the subject and went back to the house on Summerdale, the night of December 12th. After a few minor questions, he was through with Piquel. I never did understand what Amirani was doing with all that. There was the first mention of an eyewitness, and the state didn't bring it out. The defense did. I was beginning to feel that there were 6 prosecutors rather than only 4. In redirect examination, Sullivan asked only a few questions. Now, going back to Monday night, when you were in the defendant's home, you said at first he indicated he would help you in any way he would. Then he said he had to make a phone call. Then he talked to his mother. Then he became less cooperative, is that correct? Yes. Well, he told us that he had more important things to do. And we told him that, the man that is missing is important too. And he indicated to us that he felt his things were more important with the death in his family. And he asked the question, don't you have any respect for the dead? Now, it was bad enough that Sullivan ended his questioning with that, but in re-cross-examination, Amirani emphasized the same question, trying to clarify it. Piquel brushed it off by saying, well, Gacy did have a death in his family, and I could see him being concerned about that. No further questions. I sat in shock, wondering whose side Amirani was on. Instead of attacking the prosecution's vulnerable witnesses, Sam was doing the opposite. He could have attacked the discovery of Peast's jacket. It hadn't been found in the initial search. He should have impugned the police for illegal restraint for holding me without a charge. He should have assailed the testimony, which improperly depicted me in an old assault arrest. Amirani knew the whole story behind that, but didn't clarify it. In 1974, when I was charged with assaulting a male in Northbrook, the charges were dismissed. The victim tried to blackmail my wife at home over the phone. I called the sheriff's office and they set up a payoff in a restaurant at Devon in California, and the man was arrested. Amirani, instead of defending me and attacking the state's case, was interested only in laying the groundwork for his insanity defense. He asked Piquel questions which attacked my character in areas that this witness hadn't mentioned and the state had not covered. It was like Amirani was flinging mud on the parts of my character where Sullivan missed. February 11th, Monday. Both the weather outside and the mood in the courtroom were gray and morose. The state would attempt to follow my activities from the time of their initial visit at my house until I found time to report to the Des Plaines police station. Their purpose was to link me to the Robert Peast murder, and then, by extension, to the murders of the 32 others. My purpose was to show that there was no connection and to prove my innocence. But as the trial moved on, it became more apparent to me that there existed a pact between my attorneys and the prosecutors. The state was trying to bury me. My lawyers, instead of trying to lift me out of the hole, seemed to be kicking more dirt on top of me every time they cross-examined a witness. The first witness of the morning was Dennis Johnson. Attorney Varga represented the state and established that Mr. Johnson worked for the Illinois Tollways Department. Johnson described his job as primarily driving a truck to give assistance to people stalled on the tollway. He worked the midnight to 8 a.m. shift and was working the morning of December 13th. About 2:30 that morning, he came upon a black Oldsmobile resting in a ditch at the side of the road at milepost 28 northbound. He said the car had a police light on the left side. What's a police light? According to Mr. Johnson, it was one of two matching spotlights with red lens. He was shown State's Exhibits 53 and 54, pictures of my car with both spotlights turned to show the lens. During his testimony, Johnson twice contradicted himself. When he arrived, he had a partner with him in the truck. At first, he said his partner got out of the truck. Then he said this partner stayed in the truck the entire time. Then he claimed the man talked with me, and he overheard me tell the man that I was a police officer from Rockford working on a murder scene. He said he was there for 20 or 25 minutes and then called a tow truck for me. Varga showed Johnson exhibit number 52, a page out of his logbook for that night, and asked him to read line 6. Time 2:30. Milepost 28, black Oldsmobile. License number PDM 42. Mata, on cross-examination, could have mind-boggled this witness. He had all the facts about what happened. I had fallen asleep at the wheel because of an overindulgence of Valium. A few minutes after I landed in the ditch, the tollway truck came by, and the two men got out. Both my spotlights were turned downward, and the lens could not have been seen in the darkness. A minor point, but another way to discredit the witness. I had already begun trying to get myself out of the ditch, using the jack and the spare tire for traction. Johnson and friend tried using a piece of plywood from the truck. When that failed, they called a tow truck. I waited in the car with the motor running and the window down, trying to stay awake in the cold air. Varga called Robert Kirkpatrick, the owner of Kirk's Towing Company. On the night of December 13th, he received a call from the tollway authority that there was a car needing towing out of a ditch at milepost 28 on Tri-State northbound. When he arrived at the location, he spotted a late model Oldsmobile sitting off the road in the ditch. Varga asked if the car had any special features on the outside and was told that it had a spotlight on the driver's side. Kirkpatrick identified photo exhibits 53 and 54 as being the car. He said that when he arrived, the driver of the car was slumped over the wheel. He knocked out the window and I woke up. He had me turn the wheel, then hooked up the front of the car with a chain and pulled it out with his truck. When he was asked to identify the driver of the car in court, he said, "I can't identify him today, sir." That upset Varga, but Kirkpatrick was firm. The witness said I paid cash and asked for the bill to be made out to the Cook County Lighting District. He was shown Exhibit 55 and identified it as a bill for his services. Nothing further, Varga said. Amirani knew I had taken both copies of the bill that night, so their Exhibit 55 was a phony bill they illegally improvised, but he did not challenge it. He asked Kirkpatrick about being able to identify me. Well, that man might be the man in the courtroom, but I couldn't positively identify him. As a matter of fact, the night you saw him, he looked like somebody you certainly wouldn't want to run into that time of night, didn't he? Egan's objection was loud and clear, but the witness had already started with, "Not particularly." "Well, you told somebody about a year ago that the man in that car was certainly someone you wouldn't want to run alone into at night. Did you tell that to somebody about a year ago?" "I possibly did, sir. I could think of 100 people I wouldn't like to run into on a bad hunk of road at night." "So, when you arrived there at the location, you got the impression that he was groggy and probably under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Then, when you talked to him after the car was towed, you didn't get that same impression. Is that what you're saying?" "That's correct." On redirect, Vargas snapped several quick questions. "Did Mr. Kirkpatrick smell alcohol on my breath? Did he see any liquor bottles around me? Did I stutter my words?" The witness answered no to all these questions. Amirani on recross asked Kirkpatrick if he had talked with investigators on November 7th, 1979. "Yes." "Isn't it a fact that those investigators, upon arriving at the location of Gacy's car, you recalled him as being groggy and probably under the influence of alcohol or drugs?" "That's correct." Amirani could have attacked the state's assertion about the spotlight's red lens. It was not up, so in fact you cannot see what color it was. He could have asked Kirkpatrick about the color of the lens. I thought the defense was going to take apart the state's case-in-chief as part of our three-pronged defense, but it was never to happen. It bothered me that my attorneys were allowing the state's feeble testimony, however minor it might have seemed then, to go uncontested when it could have been shredded so effortlessly. Gerald Lokensoll was called and introduced as the Des Plaines officer who worked from midnight to 8 a.m. on December 13th. At 3:20, John Gacy walked into the station and asked to see Lieutenant Kosinchak. He was told that the lieutenant had waited for him until 1 o'clock and left word that Gacy should call in the morning if he showed up. I asked Lokensoll to tell Kosinchak that I would call him in the morning. He said he noticed that I had mud on my clothing and shoes, that I seemed nervous and my eyes were glassy and bloodshot. Sullivan asked nothing further of Lokensoul. I couldn't believe it. Mata didn't have a single question. Before any more witnesses were called, there was an introduction of evidence outside the presence of jury. Garippo said he first had to rule on a couple of items that the state wanted to introduce as evidence, whether, with respect to the first search warrant, they could be fairly submitted as evidence. He asked the state to produce a copy of the inventory to show that, or if, those items were on that list. The state brought in a plastic bag containing a pair of handcuffs with a key, supposedly confiscations from the first search warrant and marked as Exhibit Number 32. A piece of rope found in my trash basket was proffered as Exhibit 6. Exhibit 35 was a 2x4 with 2 holes bored in each end. The state declared that the handcuffs and the key were found in the Summerdale house and the southwest bedroom in a plastic bag. My attorneys failed to point out that the cuffs were with the rest of my clown paraphernalia, and their original unopened plastic bag just the way they came from the store, and that we had a witness to show where and when I had recently bought them. Garippo admitted them as acceptable evidence. Judge Garippo refused to admit the length of rope as evidence. Next, the state presented the 2x4. Kunkel alleged that it was obviously designed to be a restraint of some kind. Mata objected. Judge, with respect to the board, there was no indication that it was ever used for anything. And there isn't anything from any of the discovery the state has given us. Garippo ruled against us. With respect to the board and the handcuffs, I will allow those in view of the complaint for a search warrant, in view of the fact that they could be used for restraint. With the conclusion of the introduction of evidence, the jury was recalled to the courtroom. The bailiff called up Lieutenant Kosenchak. Egan began the direct questioning, starting out by covering the same things he had covered with Sergeant Piquel. How Kosenchak and Piquel came to the house, what was said inside, who was present at the time. Kosenchak said that he was on the case from the morning of December 13th up until my arrest. He said that on December 13th, I came into the police station at 11:15 a.m. and gave a statement. He claimed that I waited willingly, was not coerced in any way, and that about 4 o'clock he had a conversation with me. He said he told me that he had a valid search warrant to my house and asked for my keys, which I handed over to him willingly. He then went with 4 other officers to the house, where they were met by an officer from the Cook County Sheriff's Office, Carl Humbert, an evidence technician who took pictures throughout the house and the garage. Egan showed Kosenchak pictures, exhibits 56 through 69, and asked him if they were on the inside of the house and the garage. Kosenchak went through them and identified each one. He then identified the handcuffs and the 2x4, stating that they were found in the house. The search, he said, lasted some 2.5 hours. Egan asked if I was still at the police station when he returned. Yes, he said, but I left with my attorney shortly after they started a preliminary accounting of the items that were removed from the house. Egan asked him about recovering an automobile. Kosenchak stated that they had taken one black Oldsmobile and secured it in the police station garage. Egan then added more photos to his exhibits, pictures of the inside of the car trunk, averring that Kosenchak found human hair in that trunk. Egan presented that as evidence to the jury. After the inventory was appraised, where did you go with this case? I ordered a surveillance to begin of John Gacy. Your witness? Before starting his cross-examination, Mata requested a sidebar. He asked Judge Garippo about allowing Exhibits 73 and 74, the pictures of the car, and Exhibit 72, the envelope with human hair. The judge agreed that they were improperly obtained without a search warrant and therefore must be disqualified as evidence. Mata failed to have Garippo instruct the jury about this ruling. Mata went over the direct examination with Kosinchak, who listed the names of the officers who participated in the surveillance. Mata suggested that I had cooperated amicably with the police during questioning and cited my calmness. Kosinchak agreed, ending it with, Mata said, "And after you told Mr. Gacy that you had a search warrant, he voluntarily gave you the keys to his house. Is that correct?" "Yes, he wasn't under arrest at the time." Mata didn't attack that statement, even though he knew better. Why did Kosinchak slam me against a wall, have me searched, and throw me in a cell for 4 hours if I wasn't under arrest? If I had voluntarily surrendered my keys, why didn't they take me to the house when I asked to go? Why didn't they give me a copy of the search warrant if they had one, or leave one at the house? There was nothing unassailable in the state's case, but my lawyers were assailing not on an iota of the testimony of the state's witnesses. Slowly, subtly, the state was squeezing in testimony inconsistent with the truth. The toll worker claimed I was obviously drunk or drugged, contradicted by the tow driver who said I was alert. The tollway worker who couldn't remember his partner's name. Obviously, he was protecting his buddy from having to testify in court. Miss Mertes couldn't decide about the color of the truck or its lettering. Why did my attorneys find these contradictions so acceptable, so impregnable to questioning or direct assault? Now, in my death row cell, as I scrutinize tens of thousands of pages of trial motions, transcripts, judgments, I see how well greased was the path that carried me here. The three-pronged defense was a myth. Wittingly or not, the assistance the defense rendered the state by omission of my witness interrogation, by ignorance of the law or by ignominious collusion, is what put me on death row. Not a victorious trial by the state. From the opening words of the opening day of my trial, insanity is the only cause my attorneys espoused. The state called Robert Zimmerman to the stand. Sullivan established that Zimmerman was 18, and in 1978 worked part-time at a Shell station in Park Ryde. After PDM moved its account there in the early spring of 1978, John Gacy used to come in about 4 times a week, usually late in the evening during Zimmerman's shift. After getting gas, he would sometimes hang around and talk. Zimmerman got to know him quite well. Zimmerman said most of the help were guys his age, teenagers. Sullivan asked about Gacy offering jobs. Gacy came in one time and he asked if I would like a better job with him, making about $300 a week. And I said yes. But it would have to be during the summer months because I wouldn't quit high school to go work. Did Gacy ever give you drugs or marijuana? Gacy would come in with marijuana, a joint, once in a while, and he'd be smoking them, and on occasion he'd offer a drag off it. When he'd go out on a trip, he would, with the foreman or whatever, he'd take speed. Did he ever offer any other teenage employees any marijuana? Yes. Many occasions? A lot of occasions. Did he offer any speed at the station? Only me that I know of. Can you describe what that speed was? They were black, called black beauties. By speed, you are referring to the amphetamines or an upper? Yeah, a stimulant. Mr. Zimmerman, have you ever been in Mr. Gacy's house at 8213 West Summerdale? Yes, maybe 5 times. Mr. Gacy invited me. Was this a general invitation or a specific invitation which led you to his house? Well, a specific invitation. Mr. Gacy was having a theme party. Italian festival, I think. Did he invite any of the other teenagers to his house? Yes, along with other people at the gas station. Calling your attention specifically to the month of November of 1978, were you invited over to his house one evening? Yes, after I closed up the station at 10 o'clock. When you arrived at his house, were you invited in? Yes, I guess you would call it a family room. It had a bar and a pool table. Who was there, and what were they doing? John Gacy and Rich Henley, besides me, and they were playing bumper pool and drinking beer. Were you offered anything to drink? Yes, by John Gacy. Were you offered anything else besides alcohol? There may have been some. I think there was some pot. Mr. Mata. Objection to what he thinks. Either he knows it or he doesn't. Sullivan. Did you see any marijuana there? Yes, there was marijuana. In the conversation you had, was there anything specific about any sexual activities? Yes, in a bet. Playing bumper pool, he wanted to bet that if he won, I'd have to pay him $200 or give him a blowjob. Or if he lost, he would give me $200 or give me a blowjob. Did you tell him whether or not you were betting him? I said no, I wouldn't bet. After playing bumper pool with him, do you recall who won that game? He did. Was there any conversation at that time? Yeah. He said that we did bet, and I said we didn't. It went back and forth with I did, and you did, and I didn't, and I was kind of refraining and walking backwards, around the table, and he was kind of walking towards me. And Henley was sitting in the leather recliner, and Mr. Gacy asked him if I did. Well, Henley was pretty drunk, and he said I did. And with that, I said I wanted to go home. Did you leave? Yes, I went to my girlfriend's. Nothing further, Your Honor. Cross-examination was handled by Amirani. Mr. Zimmerman. Now, after that happened in Mr. Gacy's house, the bet in the pool game, you walked right out of there. Isn't that right? Yes. I went over to my girlfriend's house. Did Mr. Henley or Mr. Gacy at any time stop or grab you or anything? Did they? No. But I asked Henley to come with me, and he refrained. He said he wanted to stay. And after that date, had you had occasion to see Mr. Gacy at all at the gas station where you worked? Yes, several times. Did Mr. Gacy, when you saw him, did he ever hit you or strike you or do anything to hurt you at all physically? No. The day that you were in the house, did you think Mr. Gacy was propositioning you? What did you think? I don't know. I really just thought it was kind of weird, and I left. When you saw Mr. Gacy later on, or when he saw you, other than not striking you or hitting you, did he ever mention anything? Did he threaten or menace you in any manner? No, not in any way. Did he warn you that if you told anybody, he would kill you? No. Amorini went on to the Italian festival party, which Zimmerman said he attended. That was a pretty big party, wasn't it? Yes, close to 300 people. Were they mostly older people or mostly younger people? Or what kind of people were there? There was a lot of older people than younger people, maybe about 10% younger people. At that party, how would Mr. Gacy act? Or how did he act at that party? Do you remember? It was kind of weird, because he was with us a lot, and it struck me kind of odd that he was smoking with us. And I asked him, didn't he care about his older friends knowing it? He said no. If they didn't like it, they can lump it. It was just that kind of attitude. I cannot see what important substance Zimmerman had brought for the state, nor what Amorini had done profitably for my defense. Zimmerman gave more opinion than anything. He mentioned a job, but it was always he who inquired about a job. I always told him to stay and finish school. There was no offer from me of a job. He asked me if I would hire him after he was out of school. He also had it backwards about the pot. It was him or one of the other employees who offered me a joint. All the boys there smoked pot. It was the only place I knew where I could gas up and get high at the same time. He mentioned a pool game and a lewd bet. It never happened. Henley and I were high and were joking with him. All they had to do was ask Rich Henley. He was there. We never made such a bet. Sullivan, after Zimmerman, said I offered him a drink, came back with, "Were you offered anything besides alcohol?" The transcripts prove that Zimmerman didn't say it was alcohol that was offered. Sullivan did. When he came in, Zimmerman asked what I had to drink, and I told him to help himself. Zimmerman claimed he got a specific invitation to the theme party. The fact is that the invitation was addressed to the owner of the station and his employees, like with all the businesses doing business with PDM. He found it weird that I was sitting with younger people when he got there. Amorini failed to bring out that the party started at 6, and young Zimmerman didn't arrive until close to midnight. By that time, I had been at every table for a while, and it was time I visited the young people. Amorini knew all this, but never brought it up. I guess it didn't fit into his insanity defense. Mr. Richard Raphael was called. He was a general contractor whose specialty was retail stores, and had known John Gacy about 9 years. In 1978, after not seeing each other for 2.5 years, they met, talked business, and subsequently entered into a partnership. Gacy would bring his jobs into the corporation and act as overall superintendent. Egan for the direct examination. Calling your attention to December of 1978, and specifically December 11th, 1978, a Monday. Did you talk to Mr. Gacy on the phone? Yes. There were various phone calls. One of the phone calls was about 5 p.m. or so. What was discussed between you and Mr. Gacy at the time of that phone conversation? Well, he was supposed to be at a meeting at 7 o'clock that evening to discuss a job and to meet another superintendent that I was hiring to run my stores. Did Mr. Gacy indicate to you at that time whether or not he would attend that meeting? Yes, he said he would be there. Did Mr. Gacy attend that meeting on Monday night, December 11th? No, He did not. Now, calling your attention to later that evening, Monday, December 11th, did you finally have a conversation with John Gacy? Yes, around 10 p.m. When you had that conversation with him, what did you ask him about his attendance at the meeting, and what did he tell you? Well, I asked him where he was and why he hadn't been at the meeting. I was perturbed because I had two other people sitting there, and he elaborated on a number of excuses. One, he had said he had a flat tire. Then he said something about an uncle dying, and then he said he was tired and he was sleeping. I just kind of wrote it off to the fact that he didn't want to be at the meeting and forgot about it. When you spoke to John Gacy on the evening of December 11th, 1978, at approximately 10 o'clock, did you notice anything odd in the questions you asked John, or the answers he gave, or the things that he said to you during the phone conversation in the way he said them? Well, I noticed that he was coming up with one excuse after another, and I really didn't want to be bothered talking about it. Did he speak coherently? Yes. Was his language coherent? Yes. Was it a normal tone of voice? Yes. And you met him the next morning? Yes. Was there anything unusual about his behavior, his speech or appearance the next morning, which struck you as odd or unusual? No. When you arrived at Mr. Gacy's house on the night of December 13th, what did he say in that conversation? I had asked what was going on. He told me that the police had searched his house, and I asked him what they found. And he told me that they found some marijuana, a needle, and then he mentioned something about a blood stain on the carpeting, and went on to tell me that somebody had cut themselves when they put, when they're installing the carpeting, which I thought was strange, and then he had mentioned to me they had found some magazines. Emirani. Judge, object to the long narrative at this point. The court. All right, objection sustained. Try to answer the question. Emirani. Can we have a sidebar? All right. Outside the hearing of the jury. Emirani. Judge, I have to ask for a mistrial at this point. The syringe is not in evidence. The state is attempting to elicit testimony regarding materials that have been suppressed from evidence. I didn't want to jump up and object right in the middle of things, but if that happens again, I'm going to have to ask for a mistrial. I ask you to strike the answer given already. Garippo. All right. Your motion is denied on the grounds that this is a conversation he had with another person, which has nothing to do with the police using it. It is relative to bringing a man over to his house so it would go in. Emirani. But it's certainly one way to get evidence that has been suppressed. It's kind of coming in through the back door, and I don't think that proper. Well, it's a conversation that he had, not with the police. He said the police took it out of the house. The thing is suppressed, regardless of whether he says it or the police who say it. It's suppressed. Well, it would be admissible for a lot of reasons. He is the one telling him. He is the one bringing this man over to his house. It shows his state of mind. The answer may stand. Your objection is overruled. I would ask Your Honor to at least admonish counsel to limit his testimony elicited from the witness to those matters which have not been suppressed. What is the purpose of a motion to suppress if you get it in through the back door without us opening it? Overruled. The sidebar ended here. Robert Mata did the cross-examination. When was the first time you met Mr. Gacy, and in what capacity? Raphael. About 9 years ago. I was the general contractor on a job building an addition. He was called in by the owner of the addition to do some painting or general maintenance. So, in the course of the coming years, between 1970 and 78, you had a continuing business relationship, if you characterize it like that. Yeah, it was. I would call it continuous. It was. He wasn't always doing work for me, but I had hired him to do specific jobs and at various times. Did he, in fact, operate as a superintendent for you? Yes, he operated in a dual role. He was a subcontractor who, for a set amount of money, did a specific function. And he also was considered a superintendent for drugstore-related work. So that evening, December 11th, that he did not appear at the meeting, would you characterize that as being unusual for Mr. Gacy, not appearing at a meeting? Yes. In fact, that was the only meeting he had ever missed with you. Is that correct? That I can recall. Now, how many hours a day would you say that Mr. Gacy worked on an average? John would work a 15 to 16-hour day. In fact, that was normal for him, was it not? Yes. Would you characterize him as a workaholic? Yes, I would. Before you talked to the police, John Gacy was aware. Did he tell you to say anything or coach you in any way to tell them anything in particular? No. John Gacy told me to tell them whatever I knew. Isn't it a fact that you told the police after December 13th that when you had spoken to John Gacy, that he had been irrational or scared since that Wednesday? Yes. I don't know if irrational is a word. Not irrational, no. Did he seem concerned about what he was supposed to do with respect to funeral arrangements for his uncle? Yes. He had mentioned something about his mother, and he was the only one here to handle it or something. He seemed to be involved in it. I didn't pay too much attention to it. He was somewhat preoccupied. Did you see any marijuana or any drugs around his house? No. On the 3 or 4 occasions you have been at his house, did Mr. Gacy ever offer you a drink? No. It was always, help yourself. The state felt that Raphael had been an important witness. From what? The only things he answered in court were trivial facts with which I concur, except his implying that I was a mere employee. The reason for that was he owed me some $6,000 for work I completed, and his payments were in arrears. Disassociation with me as a partner would weaken any case I might bring in a civil suit. My weekly draw was $675. I know of no employee with such an inviolable draw. No, we were partners. But that disagreement had no bearing on the case. His testimony was not in any way pivotal or even substantial. He said nothing that I wouldn't have said on the witness stand, with minor altercation. The state called Tony Antonucci to the stand. He was 20 years old, an engineering student at the University of Illinois in Chicago. In the summer of 1975, when he was 15, he met John Gacy, who offered and he accepted a summer job working general construction. He started early in June and received $3 an hour. Egan for the state. Calling your attention to June of 1975, shortly after you started work, starting work for John Gacy, did you assist him at a job at the Democratic headquarters on Montrose Avenue? Antonucci. Yes, in the evening, probably 8 or 9. What was your purpose for going to the Democratic headquarters with John Gacy that night? To clean up and to set up chairs for a meeting the next day or evening. During the course of your cleanup and assisting John Gacy in cleaning up and setting up chairs, did anything unusual take place? Yes. John began making advances toward me, asking me to perform homosexual activities. What did you say in response to that? No. All right. What else did Mr. Gacy do? We went into another room in the same building, and we sat down on the couch, and I guess had a bottle of whiskey, and asked me if I wanted a drink. I can't remember if we did or didn't, but if we did, we just had maybe 1 shot apiece. Did he say anything else to you at that time? He started asking me about homosexual activity, Offered money or asked if it could be my job. What did you say to that? No. I continued with no replies. Did the conversation about homosexual acts at that time eventually cease? Yes. We continued about our work, setting up the rest of the chairs and mopping up. Did you take him serious at this point? Not really. I thought it was like a test, or like a joke, practical joke. See how you would handle pressure. Now, during the course of your continuing to set up the chairs, did anything unusual take place or happen at that time? Again, making advances to grab my buttocks, and I moved away. I worked at a different part of the room for a while. What did you finally do at the end of this? I had a chair, and I sort of picked up a chair like I would swing it. And what was his response to that? John sort of laughingly asked me why I didn't just say stop, before. Where were you going to stay that night? Well, I wanted extra hours, so we were going to work the next morning early. I planned to stay over by his house. After these incidents you have described in the Democratic headquarters, and after he stopped making these advances on you, did he say anything to you about anything? No. I think we went out to eat, get something to eat. Hot dog or hamburger, something of that nature. Did you then go back to John Gacy's house with him? Yes. I stayed up a while, Talked, watched TV, then went to bed. Where? And where did he sleep? I slept in one of his daughter's rooms, and John either in his room or on the couch. I don't remember which. Would you describe your sleeping there as uneventful? Yes. We were out a little, late the night before, so we didn't get up as planned. Probably later. Did there come a time during the month of July when you injured your foot on a job site? Yes. We were working at Raphael's house, and I'd been wearing gym shoes instead of construction shoes, and I stepped on a 2x4 with a nail on it, and the nail punctured my foot. Did you take the rest of the day off? It was near the end of the working day, but yeah, I did. And the next day I stayed home, too. That's where you lived with your mother and father, right? And were they home? Yes, but they were away on vacation. Calling your attention to approximately midnight that second night, what happened? John came over, said he had been at a party in the neighborhood. He had a bottle of wine. What took place after he came in? We sat down, were talking for a while. He asked me if I wanted to drink some wine, and we each had a glassful. And as you were sitting there talking with him, drinking wine, did he suggest anything to you? Mentioned that he had stag films and projector out in his car that he had from the party, and if I wanted him to go out and get them. What did you say? At first I said it didn't really matter. I didn't care. But after I said okay and he retrieved them from the car. Now, after showing you these stag films, what is the next thing that took place between you and Gacy? For a while, we just talked for a few minutes. Then we began wrestling around, arm locking and headlocks on each other. Sort of regular collegiate wrestling. Not really serious. During the course of this wrestling around, did anything unusual take place? After a few minutes, I all of a sudden felt John putting a handcuff on my left wrist. Eventually, he got my other arm too, and I was knocked to the floor. After you were on the floor in that position, what did Gacy do? He started to unbutton my shirt and unbuckle my pants and pulled my pants down halfway to my knees. What did he do next? Did he say anything? He left the room, went to the kitchen and said nothing. While he was in the kitchen, what were you doing? I noticed the right cuff wasn't real secure, and I worked my hand out of it. I could squeeze my hand out, but I kept it beneath me. When he returned to the room, had your hand been freed by you? Then what did you do? I stayed there, looked like I was handcuffed until he came over there near me. Then I grabbed both of his legs and tackled him down. Were you engaged in any sort of athletics in high school? Yes, wrestling and track. After you tackled him and got him on the floor, what did you do? I took the handcuffs that I removed from my right wrist, put it on his wrist, found the key in his hand, took off the left one and put it on him behind his back. After you got him handcuffed, did you get up off him? Not right away. After a minute, I was holding him face down. As you were holding him there, handcuffed, what did he say to you? He said, "You're the only one that not only got out of the handcuffs, but put them on me." What did you do after that? I kind of walked away, He was still handcuffed laying there. Then after a while, I guess we talked or something, and I just unhandcuffed him, and he went home. As a matter of fact, after he left your apartment that night, did you continue to work for him? Yes, until the spring of 1976, then part-time. After the second incident with the handcuffs, and during the rest of your employment with John Gacy, was there ever another incident like you have described? No. Amirani on cross-examination. The story you have just related to the state's attorney on direct examination, the first time you ever told anybody about that was after John Gacy was arrested. Is that correct? Antonucci. Yes. Now, during the first incident at the Democratic headquarters, you said Mr. Gacy just came over and asked you for a blowjob. He asked to, but he didn't seem totally serious. But it was not laughingly. I didn't take him seriously. Then the second time was in your own home. And immediately before this wrestling around and so forth, you were watching some kind of stag movies, you say? Drinking wine, kind of like horseplay? Yes, not seriously. Yeah, like kids would do. After he had the cuffs on you and you were laying there and he pulled your pants down, did he put anything around your neck? No. Did he strike you or beat you or hit you in any manner whatsoever at that time? No. Kick or stomp you? No. And so when he came back in order to get this cuff on him, the right one, he started wrestling with you again? No. I stayed on the floor face up with my hands behind me. When he came near me, I had my hand so it could be parted, and I grabbed him around the leg like a football tackle, sort of. Tackled him to the floor. Then I eventually got both cuffs on to Mr. Gacy. Now did you pull your pants up by this time, by the way? I don't recall. Yes. So your pants were up and they were buttoned? They weren't in your way. I mean, you weren't tripping over them? They were pulled up, at least. I'm not sure about buttoned. They were never below my knee. Now, when he was down and handcuffed, was he threatening you at all? Cursing you out? How long was he handcuffed? Between 5 and 10 minutes. He wasn't cursing, nor did I feel threatened. And then what did you do? Just decide to take them off? Weren't you scared of him? No, it was agreed he was going to leave, and I just let him up, He didn't do anything then. I never figured it was a threat to me, I thought it was a joke most of the time. As a matter of fact, even as Mr. Egan asked you, you continued to work for him after that. Yes. Mr. Antonucci, I believe you mentioned that the night after the Democratic headquarters incident, you slept at Mr. Gacy's house that night. Yes. Now, during the rest of that night, when you slept at his house, did he make any more advances towards you? No. After the second incident at your house, were there ever, in the next coming months that you knew him, other incidents similar to that with you? No. In the coming months, did he ever hit you or threaten you or beat you in any manner? No. The state tried to make a sexual attack out of just plain horseplay. Had Antonucci been attacked or seriously threatened, I'm sure he would not have waited 5 years to come out with it. Antonucci was always bragging how he was so great at wrestling and that no one could pin him. I liked the kid, but I wanted to show him that just because I was older didn't mean I was old. There was some booze influencing my grappling on the rug with him, and my ego persuaded me to show him I could pin him. I merely wanted the kid's respect. The handcuffs were part of my clown trappings, and I can now see that the state used them against me successfully. They were a handy gimmick for the state. The handcuffs were often in my car's glove compartment, and it was not unusual for me to show someone how I could escape them. They were no different from the myriad props a clown might use to portray humor. Tuesday, February 12th, 1980. Mrs. Barbara Weiner, attorney for the Isaac Ray Center, came forward to be heard before Judge Garippo. She stated that she had gotten a subpoena at the Isaac Ray Center. More specifically, it named beside her James Kavanaugh, Jan Fawcett, Richard Rogers, and David Guerin, all of whom were her associates. Mata asked that her testimony be continued until later. Judge Garippo moved it to the 15th of February. The state then called David Cram to the stand, and Marani asked for a sidebar. The following was held outside the hearing of the jury. And Marani: Judge, David Cram, as we indicated some weeks and weeks ago, has not been available to us at all. He's not been at the address that the state told us he was at. We have not been able to contact him whatsoever. However, I believe one time one of our investigators saw him walking with the state's investigator in this building. At that time, I believe one of our investigators even asked the state's attorney's investigator if we could talk with him, and the state's attorney's investigator pretended that, or acted as if he didn't even know what was going on. We ask that he'd be made available now. Sullivan: Number 1, as to the subpoenas that they supposedly served, this witness would testify he was living at the same address we gave the defense. Now, whether or not he wanted to talk to them is his own prerogative. If they haven't found him, it's certainly not the state's fault. Awfully strange that will take a short recess and give you an opportunity to talk to David Cram. Thank you. A little over an hour went by. After the recess, the state called David Cram to the stand. He was 22, single, and he had known John Gacy since July 26, 1976. He lived at Gacy's house at times over his 2.5 years working for PDM contractors. After these facts were established and some other preliminaries were covered, Sullivan continued his interrogation. Sullivan: Did he tell you anything about any degrees that he had? Cram: Yes, he did. He told me about a degree in psychology and sociology, and he just, built himself up like that. While you were riding in the car, did he tell you anything about his psychology degree? Yes. He said that it was good to have one, especially if you're in the trade that he's in, because you'd be able to more or less manipulate people a lot easier. Did he have any type of set saying that he gave in relation to manipulating people? Well, he more or less said, plant the seed in your head and let it grow like a forest, or something to that effect. During the first month that you worked for him, Mr. Cram, where were you living? The first month I was working for him, I lived with my grandmother, I think it was. Did Mr. Gacy at or about August 20th or 21st make an invitation to you? Yes. I think it was around the end of August that he told me that he had recently divorced and that he had plenty of space in his house. His house had 3 bedrooms that For $25 a week, it would be a lot easier for me to live there, than to get up and for work and so on and so forth. Then I'd have the whole house to myself, my own bedroom and so on and so forth. Did you move into his house at about that time? Yes, I did. Now, during the time that you lived there, during the time you worked for him, did you ever notice any drugs in his house? Yes, he had them in the refrigerator, behind the bar, and a couple of places behind the pictures. In your presence, did he ever offer these drugs to other teenagers? Yes, but employees were free to. He used to. If we were all drugged out in the morning, he used to give us a pep pill or speed or whatever you want to call it to get us going or something like that. Did you know where he got these drugs from? Yes. From behind the picture in the dining room or from his desk drawer. But originally, do you know how they got to his house? Where he got them from? From the drugstores, or someone had got them for him. Did you have occasion during that time to go to various local bars or taverns with him? Yes, we went to a few. During the times you were at taverns, how would Mr. Gacy act in relation to females? Same way any other guy would. We'd sit around there, act like a bunch of howling dogs, I guess you would say. Just talk to him, stuff like that. What was your conversation that you would have with Mr. Gacy in relation to women? The usual conversation, how they were built, how they were stacked, Did you ever hear Mr. Gacy brag about the women he was dating? Yes. Yes, he used to. He was hung up on a couple of them. He was even talking about marriage. Nothing ever became of it, but he liked girls. Like with a strong backbone. He didn't like the ones that you could yell at and they'd climb under a table. He liked the ones that stood up to him. In relation to Mr. Gacy telling you that he was bisexual, did he, during this period of time, tell you whether or not he was concerned, whether he had sex with a man or a woman, and why or why not? Not really, because he didn't much care just so long as, excuse the phrase, he got his cookies off. Calling attention to your birthday, 1976, were you at Mr. Gacy's house on the evening of your birthday? Yes, I was. Did anything unusual occur that evening? Yes. When I came in, it was my birthday, I believe, and I came into the house, and he had a clown suit on. He said that he was preparing for the next day. He had some kind of benefit, charity to do with some kids with the clowning, and he thought it would be rather cute if, seeing it was my birthday, that he leave the uniform on, and he was showing me some of his puppet and so on and so forth. Then he came up with a handcuff trick and... What do you mean by a handcuff trick? Well, how you can escape from handcuffs. Did he, in fact, demonstrate how he demonstrated them and he shook them off? I was so plowed I didn't, really pay attention to it. In September of 1976, while you were still living there, did an incident occur one evening when you were asleep in the bedroom that you described in Mr. Gacy's house? Yes. Well, I had a rough day and I just, plopped down on the bed, and I had a pair of Levi's on and pants. While you were sleeping, describe what Mr. Gacy did when he came in the room. Just pounced on me, the forearm and the throat and stuff like that, and wrestled around, and I finally knocked him off of me. When I knocked him off of me, he came back in and grabbed a hold of my pants. And I moved one way and he was moving the other way, and they just ripped. He ripped your pants. Yes, they just ripped. And we fought a lot more, and he finally laid there. Got up, walked out to the doorway, turned around, smiled a little bit, and said, "You ain't no fun." And walked into his room and went to sleep, I guess. And you say you left, moved out in September that same month. Is that correct? Exactly. During the time when you left, what, if anything, did you do for a living from October of 1976 through February of 1977? Well, when I left, I already had a job set up under my uncle for a construction company, and I worked there for a while, and then bounced around a little bit. In March of 1977, were you invited back to work for Mr. Gacy? Yes. I think Mike Rossi told me to give him a call. Now, when you went back to work for Mr. Gacy, what, if anything, did you observe about Mr. Gacy at the time that you went back? Well, it seemed like his company had built up. He had more enthusiasm about it, and he was telling me he went commercial and so on and so forth. Did he advise you that in March of 1977 that he was now getting into a complete drugstore line? Yes, PE Systems. They remodel drugstores around the country. John worked for him. He still owned his own company. Then he went off as vice president of operations, and he would subcontract on the work to his company, PDM Contractors, and he'd get the salary from PE Systems. Plus, he'd make the money off the general contracting and us. Calling your attention to the end of August of 1977, or a subsequent day during the same time, did you return to Mr. Gacy's house anticipating that you were going to be working on the garage, or tell you in fact that he wanted you to do something else? Yeah. He said that he wanted myself to go down into the basement or crawl space, and he was having the plumber do some work down there. And before then I had to get down there. That plumber wanted him to dig out the area to where the clay pipes were going to be laid. Did he tell you there was broken pipe down there? Yes, there was. How do you get down there? Where was the hatch in the floor in relation to this house? Can you step down from the stand for just a moment? Looking at exhibit number 1, this plat, can you point it out? Sure, right here. And he indicated. For the record, indicating the enclosed area to the right of where number 17 occurs. Is that correct? Yes. Was this a closet? Yeah. Calling your attention now to the date that you went down in the crawl space, Mr. Gacy likewise went down there with you. Is that correct? Yes. He had a pair of, Navy boondockers, ankle-high black boots on. When you got down into the crawl space, did Gacy tell you what he wanted done? Yes. He told me that I was to trench. In fact, he showed me a couple for a little bit what he wanted done. He showed me how deep to dig. Then, did he describe where he wanted you to dig those trenches, and how many trenches did he want you to dig? Yes, well, basically, 2 long ones. Did he also indicate any other trenches that he wanted you to dig that day? Well, right where the tile piping, the clay pipe was broken. He wanted me to, more or less, make a drain so the water would flow from where the pipe The water was coming up into the sewer itself, where the sub pump was. Did you, in fact, dig down there that day? For how long? Yes, I did, for about 4 or 5 hours. Can you show us on the plat? Keeping your voice up, will you describe the first or longer trench that you dug? Speak so that the jury can hear you. Approximately here was the sub pump, and I dug about 8-10 feet up to right where it says 15. Right up to the corner, and then right on the side, right across here to approximately here, where he indicates. For the record, Your Honor, indicating directly to the north, I believe. You described Mr. Cram about to the point of where number 15 is. Is that correct? The point of that red area where he indicated. Note, Cram pointed, not one body was ever found. Sullivan. Now, while you were down digging this day, did you notice any dirt mounds that you later described? Did you notice any dirt or those down there in the area where you were digging? Yes. Well, they were about 1 foot, 2 foot high, about the size of about 4 feet long, 3 feet long between there, and about 2 foot wide. Note. On December 13th, 1978, when Des Plaines police went into the crawl space for the first time, there were no such mounds found. Sullivan. From October 1977 through the middle of March 1978, did you notice anything different about Mr. Gacy as a person? More enthusiastic? More businesslike? More positive about what he was doing? At the time, did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Gacy? Not really, no. Just the same thing, just enthusiastic. From the end of November of 1978 was when you worked for Mr. Gacy again, is that correct? Yes. During the month of December 1978, did you at any time have a job that you did for a company by the name of Raffico? Yes, that was John's partner. Do you know who was the owner of Raffico? Richard Raphael, John's partner. You didn't work December 11th, but on December 12th, Tuesday, of 1978, did you, in fact, have a conversation with Mr. Gacy? Yes, about where I'd be working, painting Democratic headquarters. Calling your attention to Wednesday, December 13th, 1978, were you likewise still to be working at the headquarters, the precinct headquarters on that day? Yes, I was supposed to go to Democratic headquarters and finish up the job there. And I drove over to John's house. Fine. Now, when you got to the house on Summerdale, did you see anyone there? I thought he had a meeting going on. I walked into the back door, and I believe it was Lieutenant Kosenchak that confronted me with a badge and a search warrant, and he asked me if I lived there, and I told him no. Now, at approximately 11 o'clock that evening, did you make any telephone calls? Yes, I did. I called Michael Rossi's house to tell him I couldn't find a battery, and his wife Kathy told me he was out at John's house. So I thought he was just checking over and whatever. So I called out there, and John answered the phone. Seeing that he was dropping Michael off, would it be okay if he came by and picked me up? And I said, sure. When you went in the house on Summerdale, did Mr. Gacy show you anything, or did you have any conversation? Yes, we went in and walked into his office, I think right away, and got the flashlight out of the door. drawer. He said, "Turn off the lights in case anybody is watching." So we turned off the lights and we proceeded walking through his house after he looked through it real briefly. And then he turned off the light. And we started searching his drawers and stuff and seeing what was missing or whatever. They were upside down. And everything was still there, but they were upside down. What did he do when he went down in the crawl space with the flashlight? He looked around in a complete circle like this. Then he came back out and said, "I wonder what they were looking for down there." Sullivan went through the state's photo exhibits and had Cram identify the room pictured in each one. Then he went through each day, December 14th through 17th, skipped the 18th and 19th, then to the 20th, going over how the police were tailing me each day. Sullivan. Now, calling your attention to Thursday, December 21st, 1978. Did you receive a phone call from Mr. Gacy on that morning, in the morning hours? Yes, I did. I believe he was at Ron Rhodes' house. He was going to have me drive him around, but because he was in no condition to drive. That he wanted Michael Rossi to meet us at my house, as he wanted to talk to the both of us. Did he subsequently drive to your house? Yes, he did. Did Mr. Gacy say anything to you at that time? Yes, he seemed kind of very disturbed. He said that he had spent the entire evening in his lawyer's office, and he confessed to 30 syndicate killings, and he was up all night, and then he passed out on the couch, and then he wanted to go around saying his last goodbyes. He said they were syndicate-related killings, but he swears. He swore up and down. That's, in fact, when he broke down in tears. He said, "I had nothing. I never had anything to do with this boy being missing." He was talking about the Peace Boy from the drugstore. Mr. Cram, I'm going to show you certain cards, people's exhibits. Do you recognize these cards? Number 78. Earlier business cards. Across it says painting, decorating, and maintenance. Right side affiliated with American Homeowner Association. John Gacy. Exhibit number 79. John Gacy, Democratic Precinct Captain. Exhibit number 80. Norwood Park Township Street Lighting District, John W. Gacy. Next line, Cook County, George Dunn, President. People's Exhibit number 81 says PE Systems, Drug Store Designing, Merchandising, Security Service. John Gacy, Vice President and Construction Supervisor. Exhibit number 82 says Raffico, Incorporated, Construction and Developers. Next line, John W. Gacy, Vice President of Operations. Sullivan. And during that time that you knew him, did he have a certain license plate for his automobile? Right. He had a monogrammed PDM 42. 42 indicating his birthday. During that time that Mr. Gacy spoke to you in 1967 and thereafter about Iowa, did he ever tell you anything else about Iowa? Yes, he said he was in prison there. Did he tell you why he was in prison? Well, he told me that he organized something to do with pimping and prostitution, and he was also arrested for sodomy. Mata. Objection! Objection! I asked for a sidebar. Whereupon counsel adjourned to the sidebar outside the hearing of the jury. Amirani. I asked for a mistrial. Garippo. Why are you going into this on direct? Sullivan. He is talking about he's going to make a statement as to the fact that he said that he will never go back to prison. Garippo. All right. The objection is sustained. The jury will be instructed to disregard it at this time. I won't declare a mistrial because of the fact that undoubtedly it will come up in at a later time. You should not have opened that up. Mata. That changes the entire case. Garippo to Sullivan. You should not have gone into that without covering that. All right? Sullivan. The use of it. Garippo, back to Sullivan. You said you weren't going to use it on direct on your case in chief. That was settled a week before the trial. Sullivan. Judge, he has already been brought on the record. It has been brought on the record without an objection that he has, in fact, been in prison. No. Mata. Those questions were objected to right here. Amirani. For the record, we're going about this case with a certain theory. And, we have certain matters in which we are cross-examining people and so forth. As far as I'm concerned, that kind of question taints the entire presentation. It puts something in the people's mind that shouldn't be there in the first part of the case. It will not remedy it. Whereupon the following was in the presence of the jury. Garippo. The objection is sustained. The jury is instructed to disregard the statement about Iowa at this time. Sullivan. I have no further questions at this time. Thank you. Mr. Mata on cross-examination. You just looked at all those different business cards. Would you say that Mr. Gacy is a multifaceted individual? Yes. A lot of different parts of him. He did a lot of different things. You indicated that you met Mr. Gacy initially in July of 1976. You were hitchhiking? Yes, that's correct. When did you begin to live with John Gacy? The latter part of August, I believe, in 1976. Prior to that, did you have conversation regarding bisexuality? Yes. So, from that very first day that you met John Gacy, you were aware that he had some sexual preference. Is that correct? Yes. Did he ever ask you to participate in any sexual conduct with him? Well, yes, he did. And did you participate? Sullivan. Objection! Cram. Do I have to answer that? Garippo. Let's have a sidebar. Whereupon the following was outside the hearing of the jurors. Garippo. What is the basis of your objection? Sullivan. First of all, as to relevancy. And second of all, I advised the court at this time that the witness had advised me that he would exercise his Fifth Amendment right if, in fact, the objection is overruled. I'm now advising the court at this time. Garippo to Sullivan. The objection is overruled. You have gone into this situation of, we will say, sexual attacks of other people and even sexual. You designated it on direct examination. I forgot what you call the encounter in the bedroom. What is that? Where Gacy ripped his pants off? Yes. But those were done by the defendant. Now what he is seeking to do is bring out anything that is consensual, that puts it in different light. The objection will be overruled, Mr. Mata. After that, if in fact the witness asks, after you overruled it and tell him to answer, we would then ask for a sidebar out of presence of the jury, so the argument as to the Fifth Amendment might be taken up. He has a right to rest on that. I don't want it done in the presence of the jury. Mata. If that is the answer to his question, then the jury is entitled to hear it. Garippo. You are right. Sullivan. We would then ask that the records be made so we may argue his Fifth Amendment right, or let him argue it at this time. and that does not have to be done in the presence of the jury. Garippo to Sullivan. He could take the Fifth Amendment right in front of the jury. You are not going to ask anything further, okay? All right. Whereupon the following was in the presence of the jury. Mata. And did you participate in sexual conduct with Mr. Gacy? Cram. I'd like to plead the Fifth Amendment. You indicated, Mr. Cram, you had a conversation with Gacy on the first day regarding psychology and sociology, and that he had degrees. Would it surprise you if I told you Mr. Gacy only completed a college course in those subjects? Or could you have misunderstood him? No, I thought he said degrees. Now, between the months of July of 76 and September of 76, how often would you have a drink or smoke marijuana or do some sort of drugs in Mr. Gacy's house? Pretty often. We'd stop by for a beer or something to that effect. Marijuana was basically any time I wanted it, for the simple reason that we'd chip in for the marijuana. So, you procured the marijuana yourself on occasion. You got from somewhere from time to time. Yes, when I was asked so. Is there anybody else that ever participated in smoking marijuana and / or drinking alcohol on a regular basis between July 76 and September of 76? Basically all the employees there. Mike Rossi, Randy Stewart, a guy named of Jeff. So unless you were with Mr. Gacy, you wouldn't know how often he did take marijuana and drink alcohol, is that right? Yes, exactly. Now, on direct examination, you testified that on December 12th of 1978, John worked a normal day, is that correct? Yes. He went to various jobs, checked various jobs out. Now, on December 13th of 1978, you had a conversation with Mr. Gacy about a search warrant, and in the evening hours, you went over to his house, is that correct? Yes. He turned the lights on to find his flashlight. Then he turned them off. We walked around the house with the lights off again. As a matter of fact, we're talking about him looking around the house. He never mentioned that to the police, that he ever turned the lights off. Is that correct? It could have slipped my mind at the time. Kunkel. Objection. Might we know what page of Cram's statement he's talking about? Mata. It's page number 8 and 9 of his 19-page statement. I want you to tell the jury if you ever told the police he turned off the light and looked around in his house with the flashlight. Cram. Yes, I did. Reading. Went into the crawl space with the flashlight, and the lights were also on also. So the lights were on also, and nowhere in here does it say the lights were off in the house. At the time, it probably slipped my mind. I'm sorry. No, it's not in the statement, not that I can see. Did you tell the police officer that in this statement that Mr. Gacy put those handcuffs on you at one time? I'm not sure. I haven't read through it. And so, if the statement about Mr. Gacy putting the handcuffs on you is not in this report, then you didn't say it to them on that date, or it didn't happen. I suppose so. Who used to supply drugs to you or John Gacy? Did you used to buy them from somebody? Marijuana, yes. I used to bring that over to Mr. Gacy's house from time to time if he would want an ounce or so. Sullivan. Objection as to where and who, Judge. Mata. How well did you know Mike Rossi during the course of the period of time that you worked for John between 1976 in 1978. Fairly well. Every time I worked with him, we socialized together on occasion. Did Mike Rossi ever have any sexual relations with John Gacy? Objection! Overruled. That Mike Rossi, I wouldn't know. Did you ever have any sexual relation with Mike Rossi? Objection! Overruled. I'll go with the Fifth Amendment on that. Well, was Mike Rossi ever your lover? Did you make love to Mike Rossi? Objection. Judge, it's the same basis. Objection sustained. Would you characterize John Gacy as your lover? Did you ever sleep with him? Isn't that within the same? Answer the question. No, I would not, and no, I never slept with John Gacy. Did you ever commit oral copulation on John Gacy? Objection! What's this? It's the same thing, isn't it? You may answer. I'd have to plead the Fifth Amendment. Did John Gacy ever commit oral copulation on you? Objection, Your Honor! Overruled. No, I'm pleading the Fifth Amendment, yes. Do you have a lawyer? Objection. No. Sustained. How many times did you ever have a physical altercation with John Gacy? Fist fight, wrestling, anything like that? Sometimes we'd goof around and wrestle, and on those occasions that I started, do you know if Mike Rossi was ever in the crawl space? Did he ever tell you? I believe he was. I couldn't be an eyewitness to it, no, but he did tell me. How many times were you down in the crawl space? One time. It was around the end of August of 77 for broken sewer piping, clay tile piping. Now, how many trenches did you dig? I dug one up to here, one over here, and one back here, indicating on the plat map, exhibit number 1. Now, you also indicated that one night you came home and you were tired and you went to sleep, is that correct? And then Mr. Gacy came and he pounced on you? Yes. And did he have the handcuffs with him? No, he did not. And he tore your pants off or just ripped them, right? And these were Levi's, right? Well, they were kind of old. I see. And after that, did he attempt to attack you sexually? No, because after he did that, he just got up and said, "You're no fun," and walked away. Did you continue to live? Did you have a conversation the next day? Oh, yes, I did. I think that's when I told him I'm quitting. I'm moving out. You didn't ask him why? Or he didn't make any explanations to you or anything like that? I didn't really care why. And you have known John Gacy since July of 1976 and up until December of 78. Have you ever known him to do anything else like that, except those things that you have talked about? Do anything else to me again? No, you did not. Would you say that it was totally out of character for him to do something like that? Totally out of character, not like him. You started back working for him in a few months and worked for him until December of 78. Yes, overlooking the incident. Aside from the incident that you described, you consider Mr. Gacy to be a likable individual. He's trying on your nerves because he's a tough boss, and he's nitpicking, and he's a perfectionist. Yeah, we can summarize it to that. Sullivan on redirect. Mr. Cram, at any time before the date that Gacy was arrested, did he ever tell you that he had killed anybody before that? Cram. He used to always brag about his syndicate relations and about syndicate-related killing, but he never said that he directly killed anybody. He said that he set it up. Did you ever see any bodies in John Gacy's crawlspace? Yes. One. My girlfriend. She hid down there one time. Other than that, no. Did you ever procure any young boys for John Gacy to kill? Emirani. Objection. Cram. No. Mata. Objection. What kind of question is that? That's ridiculous. Garippo. Objection is sustained. Sullivan. Thank you, sir. Nothing further, Your Honor. I feel compelled to comment on the testimony of David Cram. He worked closely with me during the time the state's prosecutors felt many of those 33 young men were murdered and interred beneath my house. He stayed at the Summerdale house many times, overnight. He lived there at times for lengthy periods. What had he seen? What had he, with that proximity, even suspected? Nothing. The state knew that, so why use him as a witness? Sullivan simply wanted to squeeze into the trial manuscript some language which would at least impute a lewd side to my character. It was all he could do. Cram's testimony had nothing to do with Robert Peast. Sullivan had nothing with which to build a case, so, as a consolation, he spoon-fed this frightened David Cram into aiding their direction by having him sling some mud. What is my rebuttal? Variations between Cram's version and mine are trivial. His testimony was not damaging, and I do not need to refute it, except for the purpose of removing a wad or two of that slung mud with the solvent of truth. In 1975, not 1976, David Cram was fired from his job and asked me for work. I gave him a job and let him stay in my house because his family had thrown him out and he was virtually living in the streets. Cleverly, the prosecution led him to say that I told him I had a degree in psychology, and from that learning I found it easy to manipulate people. A ploy to imply that I was Svengali to 33 young men. I watched the jury. They listened raptly. Sullivan had no evidence, so he used illusion. Sure, I wrestled around the room with Cram on an occasion when we had both been drinking, and between our efforts his pants were torn, but they were not the sturdy Levi's Sullivan wanted you to believe. I wouldn't have dressed as a clown just for him, even if it was his birthday. The guys at work would have found out and humiliated us with jokes. I tried my trick handcuffs on him. He testifies for the state that I did, but he testifies for the defense that he wasn't sure. He said he did remember. He said he didn't remember. He admitted that I didn't attack him sexually. He pointed out in the state's display diagram where I had him dig, and it was where a body was found. Would I have had him down there digging around if I had hidden a bunch of bodies? It was another clever tactic to have Cram take the Fifth Amendment instead of honestly answering the question. It suggests that we did have sexual relations and that he wanted to cover it up. On December 13th, when the police came to see me, Cram was kept outside in the cold. And afterward, when I inquired of him what was said out there, he told me that all they did was ask him a couple of questions. Then, in court, he swore that in the driveway they showed him a badge and a search warrant. Why didn't they show it to me? Why didn't he tell me that? Michael Rossi was the next witness to take the stand. Rossi was 20 years old, married with one child. He was a union carpenter. He worked with, lived with, and was befriended by John Gacy during May of 1976 and to the end of 1978. Kunkel for the state. How did you meet John Gacy through your contracting work? Rossi. I was working with a plumbing contractor at the time. The man was overworking on Gacy's plumbing and he brought me along. Did you have a conversation with John Gacy about that time, about what you might be able to make working for him? Yes, I believe I did. I think he offered me $3 an hour and guaranteed me 40 hours a week. I direct your attention to an object setting out here in the middle of the courtroom, which has been labeled People's Exhibit number 77. Do you recognize what that wooden object is? It looks like the hat to the crawl space in Gacy's house. During those first months that you worked for him, did you notice anything unusual about him? What was his basic personality like to you? Did he run his business like a business? Nothing unusual. Oh, off the job, he was friendly, an outgoing person. On the job, he would like to crack the whip. He would like performance. He would like his money's worth. While you were working for the defendant, did you meet another young man by the name of David Cram? Yes, I did. Sometime in August. Now, do you know whether or not, for a period of a month or two, that David Cram, in fact, lived at John Gacy's house? And after Cram moved out, what did you do? David Cram lived there 2 months or so. And after he moved out, I moved in the house around late September of 1976. And do you recall about how long you stayed in the defendant's home? I think it was about April of 1977. I worked into an apartment of my own. Now, during that entire period of time you worked for him, you had occasion to socialize with John Gacy. How do you describe John Gacy as a drinker? Mostly at his house. An occasion out to a bar. I would say that he could handle his liquor. All right. And the night of August 11th, 1978, did you see John Gacy on that night? And in the early morning hours of August 12th in Cicero, Illinois? What happened? Well, that night we had been out to a couple of different taverns prior to that. It got into an argument over a pool game, and as a result it turned into a physical fight. Was that outside on the street? Who won? Yes, it was. Well, I walked away, and I stopped working for Gacy for a period of time. Now, during the time you knew John Gacy and were working for him, did you ever purchase a car from him? Yes, it was a white 71 Satellite, and the name of the previous owner is John Zick. And on the rear of the back of the assignment and title section, what are the names that are printed on the top line as being the parties to whom the vehicle has been transferred to? Michael Rossi and John Gacy. And below the written signature of the seller, John Zick. I show you exhibit number 85 and ask you to give me the name on that and what it is. It's a second title showing the names of Michael Rossi and John Gacy, a 71 Plymouth Satellite, 2-door, and the name being transferred to on the back is Michael Rossi. Could you explain why the first title was filled out with your name and the name of John Gacy, and the second one was a transfer from the two of you to yourself? Well, because I wanted the car at the time for my work, and I didn't have the money. So Mr. Gacy offered to sell me the car and put the money in advance if I paid him back on a weekly basis. But he also wanted to have his name on the title until I paid him off to get the clear title. Between 9 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. on the same night, Tuesday, December 12th, 1978, did you go over to Gacy's house? Yes, I did. I was driving a '78 black Chevy van belonging to PDM Contractors. Now, did you see anyone when you drove up to Gacy's house on that night? Yes. 3 or 4 detectives from Des Plaines Police Department interviewing Mr. Gacy. Did you go into the house after the police left, or were you inside the house? I was told to wait outside, but after a while I went in and Mr. Gacy was on the phone. After that phone call, did you have a conversation with the defendant as to whether or not you were going to continue your plan and go out after the Christmas trees? Yes. He told me to go over to Mr. Rhodes' Christmas tree lot and that he would follow shortly after. How long did you wait at the Christmas tree lot waiting for Mr. Gacy? Approximately an hour, and I ended up buying a Christmas tree, left Rhodes' tree lot and went back to the house. Directing your attention to the day, December 21st of 1978, did you receive a telephone call from the defendant, John Gacy, that morning? Business-related or what? He wanted me to come out to his house and drop off some tools. I told him I couldn't, and we compromised and met at Cram's house. About 11:15 a.m. on December 21st, 1978, did you in fact go to Cram's house to drop off the tools and go into Cram's house for a conversation? Yes, I did. He was very emotionally disturbed and said, well, at that time, he proceeded to tell myself and David about confessing to his lawyers the night before to over 30 killings. That was the high point of the conversation, and I left the residence right away. Now, during the summer of 1977, at that time, what job or what did you do relative to the defendant's crawl space under his home at 8213 Summerdale? I was to go down into the crawl space and dig a trench line for some drainage tile. Do you recall what part of the crawl space or where, if you can make reference to that drawing, exhibit number 1 plat, what area were you digging in? Number 13 towards 16, and a horizontal line between them, approximately a foot wide, and between my knee and my hip deep. Did the defendant ever ask you to go down in the crawl space and dig on another occasion? And were you willing to do it? I believe he requested it, but not a second time was I willing. Were you willing to stick around the premises and supervise newer employees who would get the job of going down and digging? Yes. Now, on the occasions when either you, yourself, or other employees under your supervision were asked to dig trenches in the crawl space, did the defendant express any concern or care about where the particular digging would go on? He would go down into the crawl space and give a specific area in which to dig. He would actually mark it out with sticks. And if someone deviated or started to go offline to the specific plan that the defendant laid out for the digging, what would he do? He would get very upset. Although you never dug in the crawl space again yourself, did you do any other job relative to the crawl space? I had the task of spreading 800 or 900 pounds of lime throughout the crawl space, at least half an inch thick, which removed the musky odor from there. Nothing further. Amirani, on cross-examination, seemed to want to unnerve Rossi. The first thing I want to do was ask you to calm down a little bit. I notice you've been real nervous on the stand. Just calm down. How are you doing? Pretty good, thanks. Secondly, I noticed, Mr. Rossi, that you referred to Mr. Gacy, Well, you referred to the man sitting over here in the light blue suit in such terms as Mr. Gacy and the defendant. All these years you have known them. Is that how you refer to him? Mr. Gacy, the defendant? What did you call him? John, the Duke, Mr. Gacy, Colonel. So there were a number of terms of friendship and affection and so forth. Isn't that correct? Yes. How many times did you rehearse your testimony before you came up here? You talked to your lawyer about it? No response from Rossi. Come on, Rossi. You have a high-priced lawyer? Did you talk to your lawyer about it? Kunkel. Objection. Ask that it be stricken. Garippo. Sustained to the remark. Amirani. Mr. Rossi, didn't you tell my investigators when they came to talk to you that you had a high-priced lawyer, and he said not to talk to us? Did he tell you that? Objection. Sustained. As a matter of fact, for what reason did you have to hire an attorney, Mr. Rossi? Objection. Overruled. Because it's my right. Good answer. Egan. Objection to counsel's commentary in the answers. Amirani. How old were you when you met Mr. Gacy? When you met John Gacy? How old now? 16. And now I'm 20. Would you say he's a man, kind of a multifaceted man, as Mr. Mata would say? A complex kind of man, a man of many facets. He didn't seem like a phony. He was authentic. Would you classify him as a workaholic? He was not a phony in that respect. Authentic, sure. In other words, a busy man. I would classify him as a workaholic. Well, how do you reach that? That opinion, that decision of a workaholic? Working beside him for 18 or 19 hours straight, when the job had to be done. Very responsible. What did he do when he wasn't working those 18, 19 hours a day that you saw? You lived with him for a while? Watched TV, book work for the company. Always the company, the company. He wanted to succeed. Now, after that initial conversation about what did you think about your interview for the job? I mean, you're 16 years. The guy's hiring you to work as a construction worker, and he starts asking if you are liberal. What did you think of that? It was a first. I don't recall. Sidebar. Not quoted on the record. Mr. Rossi, it's after that first time. I believe you just answered that after the first time during the interview, Mr. Gacy never approached the subject being liberal or having sex again with you. Is that correct? And if so, how did he bring it up? No, he brought it up again, but I don't recall. Did you ever see those handcuffs in his house? When was the first time you saw them? Yes, we were going into clowning. We were going to go clowning somebody. He brought them along. Just for clowning, nothing else. You aren't going to get mad at me. I'm not blocking the view of your lawyer back there watching you. Rossi, moving his head from side to side where Amirani was blocking. No, sir. Kunkel. I object to that. I ask that it be stricken and counsel be admonished. Garippo. The statement will be stricken, and the statement is stricken. Amirani. Okay. Now, you indicated that you went down into that crawl space when you worked for Max, and later when you worked for John Gacy. Is that correct? What? Anything unusual down there then? Well, a slight odor, a lot of bugs, a lot of mud. Damp, musty odor. When did Mr. Gacy give you the keys to his house? I believe when I moved in. Okay. Now, in that time period, May 22nd, 76 to April 77, during all that time, did this conversation about sex come up again, being liberal, when you were in the house alone together? Yes, sir, but I don't recall. As a matter of fact, Mr. Rossi, you engaged in sexual activities with Mr. Gacy. Or, Mr. Rossi, you engaged in sexual activities with Mr. Gacy, didn't you? Kunkel. Objection. Overruled. Sustained as to form. Did you ever engage in sexual activities with Mr. Gacy? Objection. Overruled. I don't know. Did you ever smoke marijuana and drink with him at the same time? Smoke and drink how many times? Yes, we did. I don't know how many times, I don't recall. Okay, Mr. Rossi, you indicated you had been driving around in a white Plymouth Satellite. Is that correct? Do you know whose car it was? Yes, sir, it was John Zick's, the night I decided to buy it. You don't remember when it was that you got the car, or when it was that you went and applied for the title, is that correct? I don't recall. It was wintertime. And as a matter of fact, when you applied for that title, Mr. Rossi, you forged John Zick's name, didn't you? Not to my knowledge. Did the police ever tell you when they questioned you that you signed John Zick's name? Or did they ask you if you signed John Zick's name? They asked me. You denied it. And you still deny it. Yes, sir.